Wonderful. Looks like we have a lot of guests today. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We're very excited to have with us today Larry Dominique, who's President and CEO of PSA in North America, as well as Alexandre Marian, who is Managing Director at the global consulting firm AlixPartners. And we're going to talk about all things Peugeot and learn about Peugeot's plan to land in America in 3 years. To introduce Larry and to begin the conversation. So Alexandre Marian is a managing director of AlixPartners. He has deep experience in strategy and operations for the automotive and industrial sectors, and he's earned a reputation as an industry expert and a trusted advisor. He's passionate about the future of mobility, and he's been quoted often in the media, including Bloomberg, Businessweek, Reuters, the Washington Post. He joined AlixPartners in 2014, and he's joining us today from San Francisco. Prior to joining AlixPartners, he was actually a project manager at Renault in Paris and was responsible for new vehicle launches. So Alexandre, I'll let you take it from here. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathy. So yeah, it's my pleasure to have this conversation with Larry today, and so talk all things Peugeot and PSA Group with Larry. So Larry Dominique is the president and CEO of PSA North America. And for those of you who don't know PSA, it's a group based out of France, headquartered in France, in Sochaux, which has the very well-known brands Peugeot, Citroën, DS, Opel, and Vauxhall. And also he operates the global mobility service brands Free2Move in North America as well. Frankly, Larry has a tremendous amount of experience. He's an industry veteran who started his career working with GM and then Chrysler. Has in various engineering roles and management positions. He has held a number of roles then as vice president of product planning at Nissan North America, and then held roles with the different companies as a president of ALG, which is an industry company expert in benchmarking for residual values, as well as TrueCar, where he was executive vice president. So you see that Larry has a tremendous wealth of experience doing everything automotive and mobility related. And so it's my pleasure to introduce him today. And Larry, what we want to hear from you is, what is your vision for PSA re-entering North America over the next few years? And how do you intend to drive that change? Thank you, Larry.
Well, first of all, thank you everybody for joining today. And I apologize, I think I'm 2 months late to this call. Thank you for the background, Alexandre. It just makes me realize that I'm getting old. But doesn't mean we can't keep innovating and keep learning, right? So, you know, the introduction of Peugeot, and when I should say, and you and I talked about this before, when I started this process with Carlos Tavares, our CEO, we hadn't decided what brand we were going to bring to North America. That was actually one of the first things we did, was studied the US market, studied the brands that PSA had under the portfolio. And ironically, at that time, Opel and Vauxhall were not part of our portfolio. That came in 2017 or 2018. So when we made the decision to bring Peugeot, one of the key things Mr. Tavares and I and the team talked about was the North American market is what we refer to as a red ocean market, when you think about business terms. There's 18 different manufacturers. There's 42 distinct brands. If you talk about Rivian and Polestar, and you might even say there's 44 or 45 brands. The average car is sold with about 10% of the price of the car on incentives presented through either the leases or to the consumer directly. But transaction prices are at a record level. You know, the process has moved from cars into SUVs and continue to have strength in trucks. What I was worried about at first with PSA was, how would American consumers react to a French brand? I know I love French wine, but it doesn't necessarily translate into loving French cars. So we did a lot of research with consumers in the United States. We actually brought over what is now the current 3008, 5008, 308, which all were new around the 2017, 2018 timeframe. And we were very pleasantly surprised through that process that American consumers had a very positive response to those products. Not just the products, but the brand. And ironically, sorry, Alexander, when we talked about Renault, it didn't necessarily have the same response. If those of us that have been around a while, there's some legacy of all these brands, Citroën, Peugeot, Renault in the United States, that were not always great. You know, Peugeot lacked quality. Renault had some quality issues with a vehicle called the Car and a few other things like that. So there wasn't a universal belief that French could make good cars. However, the awareness of the Peugeot brand, and when people saw a car unbadged, and we said, by the way, that's a Peugeot, immediately they thought the vehicle was more expensive. They thought it was closer to an Audi, closer to a BMW or Mercedes. My team got very excited. I told them, don't get excited. We're not going to try to compete with BMW and Mercedes. But what was great about that was there was no negative imagery. There was no starting in kind of a negative position where you had to dig out of a hole to start how you want to position your brand. But the key to the whole thing for us was when we looked at that distribution that's happening in the United States today, driven by significant franchise law in every single state. There are 32,000 franchise dealers in the United States. That's more than Starbucks plus McDonald's added together, all to sell cars. And something tells me when you think about how many billions of hamburgers McDonald's sells, it seems to be a strange corollary. But there are a lot of dealers in the United States. So, and they're protected. They're well protected by franchise law. So we dug in with our lawyers and our legal team and said, if I have no legacy, if I'm not a brand with brick and mortar facilities today, franchise agreements, service agreements, how can I differentiate? And they said right away, you want to be Tesla? Be Tesla. Sell direct to consumers. The problem is, and maybe it's my long time industry thinking on, but I don't want to fight with 35 states. I really don't. You know, there's 5 states that will today let you sell direct. There are 10 that are kind of in between, and there are about 35 that say no way. So we didn't want to try to do that. So what we said is, how could we innovate in a no legacy environment, but still be legally compliant in every state? And I met with NADA, I met with different franchise groups, different dealer associations, and we realized that innovation can happen and still be legally compliant. So we really wanted to take an approach where, if you see what's happening today in the auto industry, dealers are going digital. So they've got a brick and mortar facility. They're putting on top of that digital tools. So you can go to a dealer and they may have a digital process where you can actually look at their inventory, finance a car, buy a car. But it's just an added layer onto their fixed cost, their brick and mortar kind of fixed cost. And if you have 5 dealers in Atlanta, all Subaru dealers, and they all have a different digital experience, you as a consumer never get a consistent branded experience. It's very fragmented. So we said, can we control that? And we decided to take the approach that we don't want to think physical and move digital. We want to start digital. We want to assume we're going to be 100% digital and then move physical as the consumers demand it. And when we did our research, there were subtle things. I want to test drive the car. It's $35,000. I want to test drive a car. How do you get that to me? So we're going to do things like concierge. We're going to, if you on your Peugeot app, you want to do a test drive of a 3008, we will deliver it to your house, your office, your cottage, wherever you want to test drive the vehicle, we'll deliver it to you. And it's not a 15-minute drive. We'll give it to you for 24 hours. No problem. Then we'll come and pick it up again. We want, if you want on the delivery, we'll deliver the car anywhere you want it to do. But it doesn't stop at the purchase. Post-purchase, we want to continue that relationship. And we're going to do things like, for the 4-year warranty period, we're going to pick up and drop off your car for you for service. And if you purchase the maintenance package, we'll pick up and drop off your car for oil changes or tire rotations or whatever you need. So the idea was to push it digitally and see how customers would react. And 90%, 90, of the people we interviewed in the Northeast, the Southwest, the Southeast, the Northwest, said, if I never have to go to a dealership again, I'm fine. As long as you ticked off those elements that make it important for me to get my car serviced, take care of my trade-in, take care of my delivery and my financing. The next key part for us was, in that environment, how do you develop a customer experience that's differentiating? So when I talked with Mr. Tavares, we both agreed that market share is not a KPI for me. So the KPIs for me are, the first KPI I have is customer satisfaction. Customer satisfaction. Number two is profitability. So we felt we needed to deliver a unique customer experience, forgetting about what happens today in auto retail. We did benchmark. We benchmarked Tesla. We benchmarked Lucid. We benchmarked Neo. We benchmarked some of the other companies like Roadster, Moto Insight, Auto Gravity, AutoFi that are delivering digital tools into the industry today. And I hired a gentleman by the name of Chad Sexton about a year and a half ago as my vice president of digital customer experience. And he spent 18 months developing a unique customer experience. How will you, from the moment you engage with the brand through the full ownership cycle of the brand, how will you engage? And we have these beautiful flow charts and posters that document it. But what we felt was there were no automotive brands, Tesla, Rivian, Lucid, that are delivering the kind of overall customer experience we want. So we've developed this digital journey that's critically supported by a platform layer that's all about data science. E-commerce is about data science. It's about knowing, you know, if Alexander comes into our site, I want to know who he is. I want to know what he has in his household fleet. I want to know his propensity to buy. I want to know if he likes red better than blue, if I can get to that level of understanding. And I want to deliver a custom experience to Alexander. I want to help him get to a point where he knows what he wants to buy. We help him understand exactly how he wants, how it's packaged, how it's delivered. And we also want to deliver custom financing, custom incentives for Alexander, because Katie may need something than Alexander's different than Pierre, than Jason. You all have different needs, different expectations, different desires. And we want to customize. It's not a one size fits all. It's an all size fits our platform. So the idea is to deliver a very differentiated experience that then flows into the mobility aspect as well. We want to offer options. If you need a car, if you want to have partial ownership, we want to accommodate you. If you want short-term rental or car sharing, we have free to move services we can provide to you. If you want a subscription, we're going to make that available to you. If you want to buy it, I'll sell it. You know, if you want to lease it, we'll lease it. But whether you need it for a minute, an hour, a day, a week, a month, a year, multiple years, we want to have a solution that's right for you. And nobody really does that today at the brand level. Sorry, that was a long introduction.
No, that's great. That's great, Larry. And I think it's very helpful in the context of a brand experience, how to be able to be flexible and nimble. That being said, one thing that we had initially talked about as well, and I'm curious to see how PSA thinks about that, is how do you also have people that are not necessarily already at that point of the purchasing journey to get to know your brand, and how do you also level that French brand that you may want or may not want to alleviate to those customers? I think that one of the paths that has been taken by Tesla is to have some sort of brand experiences or brand centers as well. Do you have the same perspective, and how do you envision that upper path of the journey?
We do, but with a bit of savoir-faire, if we want to say that, right? So we benchmarked Tesla's galleries, Tesla's standalone stores, but they're basically fancy mall-driven dealerships. You still walk in and there's color plaques on the wall and there's material samples that you can touch. We spent some time benchmarking other brand experience centers, whether it was Starbucks, Taco Bell, Levi's. We did look at the Lexus stores in New York. We looked at the Tesla centers. And we realized that it's going to be very important to deliver a brand immersion, is the way we want to think about it. The idea is to offer a brand experience that is a destination unto itself, meaning, you know, you don't go there just when you want to buy a car. You might want to go there to explore the brand, which, by the way, the Peugeot brand is 210 years old. Everything from pepper and salt grinders to bicycles, although it's been fragmented a bit. But from a branding point of view, it's clear this is what we want to do. So developing the brand experience centers for us is about a soft sell environment where we can show the vehicles, of course, or a vehicle or two vehicles, a lot of digital tools, AR, VR, so you can experience the vehicle. You can actually drive a 3008 on the roads in California if you want to do that. But equally important to us is, how do you feel about the French side of Peugeot? And we've actually explored, and we just recently had a couple of vendors come with some amazingly innovative concepts. Think of it as a store in a store. So you have a brand experience immersion, but maybe the front of the store has the best croissant and espresso in the city of Atlanta, right? Maybe we offer a wonderful selection of French wines. Maybe we have French artists that come through on a periodic basis and show their work, or French cooks, and we do French cooking classes. So the idea is to develop this immersive interaction between the French culture and Peugeot, but also elaborating what Peugeot is on a broader sense than just a car. We had, for example, we actually brought over the 1971 Tour de France winning bicycle for some of our research. And we were shocked at how many people reacted positively to, that's cool. I mean, that's the actual bike that was run in the race. It's like, yes, one of like 50, but yes, it was one of the bikes that won the race. So the idea is to build this, and we do believe that it's not about fixing your location or fixing the dynamic of what the brand experience is. It has to be dynamic. So maybe initially in Atlanta, it's somewhere in the hip section of Atlanta, but 5 years later, it moves to a new emerging hip area of Atlanta. The content needs to be dynamic. It can't just be put the latest picture of a 3008 on a wall and we wait 4 years for the next one to come out and we put a new picture on the wall. It needs to be constantly evolving. And we believe the brand experience center in Los Angeles will be different than the one in San Francisco, will be different than the one in Dallas, different than the one in Atlanta. So it's got to be different based on the mindset and the culture of where you are. We're not trying to force fit us to them. We're trying to accommodate and be flexible within the environments that we want to set up BECs.
That's very interesting approach. And I think that also brings together all the great elements of the full Peugeot brand. You're right. I mean, I couldn't have thought that you'd see all bicycles and be able to basically build a brand, a value that really creates a customer experience. I have another question, which I think is very interesting, within the whole environment that we're all living in. So as PSA, Group PSA is actually in the merger with Fiat Chrysler as well. Yep. And so this will lead to a new group which is called Stellantis. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming that this had major implications for your specific thought process in North America. And how did that affect the overall Group PSA plan in North America? And what are, from your perspective, the key steps forward for that reintroduction of brand in North America?
Yeah, obviously, I have to be careful what I say, obviously, because of gun jumping laws and things, as the merger's not yet complete, although we're close. January 4th is the exception board meetings for both companies to vote on the final merger. It happened pretty quickly, I think, after the new year. So there's still things dynamically happening within the discussions. We can't make any key decisions until we're one company. So we've had to operate very independently, but it doesn't stop you from thinking, of course. And we actually believe there are some unique synergies and opportunities beyond the big numbers Mr. Tavares is saying, which is 5 billion euros of synergies over multiple years. But from a North American point of view, it's funny. A lot of people reach out, a lot of media reach out to me and say, oh, you're just going to start selling your cars through the SCA dealerships. I'm like, no. Why would I do that? Why would I re-enter in the same way? And if you look at what SCA has done with Fiat, with Alfa Romeo, you could say maybe they should have looked at an alternative way to bring those brands to market. They're kind of stuck in this traditional mindset, and they're trying to break away from that. And I think there's opportunities to do that. For me, the no legacy element, the digital customer journey expectation, does not interact with the existing FCA brands. You know, where Chrysler's positioned, Dodge, Ram, Jeep, it's very different from where we want to position Peugeot. So there's a lot of market synergies there. At the same time, you know, I was going to have to build HR. I was going to have to build legal. I was going to have to build finance. I was going to have to build after sales, parts and service, logistics, warehousing, part transportation, financing. That I'm going to be able to leverage a lot of that synergy post-merger. So it's going to, opportunity-wise, it accelerates my business case and makes my business case more solid because I get to capitalize on existing infrastructure.
No, that's very interesting. And even though beyond the business case, you're right that it also makes the execution of the back office function easier. And as long as for the end customers, there is no, I mean, the end customer doesn't need to know that those brands are part of the same group as well. So you may want to make sure that you separate those brands. And that's I think it is a very interesting and an important approach when you consider having a new brand entering the North American market as well, especially considering how many brands did you say? More than 40 brands are in North America. So it's a,
you know, and
now,
you know, we spent a lot of time this last year working on positioning of the Peugeot brand. What does Peugeot stand for in the minds of American consumers? And we actually just finished that activity. We had a presentation today to the global Peugeot marketing team from my CMO, Lisa Mark, and they loved what they heard. You know, and how it's different from all the other brands in the U.S. market. You know, what kind of key perceptions or key words do consumers think about the Peugeot vehicles and the brand, and how do we make it different than those other ones? And one of the key words is joie de vivre. So we're trying to build a positioning around that kind of concept.
Interesting. One other question. So beyond the customer experience, beyond the effect of the merger, you have a set of specific products or future products that the Peugeot brand is already thinking bringing into North America. I am very familiar with the products that you mentioned, the 308, 3008. Those are hits in Europe. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that you'll come with similar products in North America? Will you be providing more on the upper end? We know Americans like big cars. So how do you see the product lineup?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in the United States, today there are still 5 segments that matter. And those 5 segments make up about 61-62% of sales in the US. It's the C segment sedan, still important segment. It's the C segment SUVs. So when I say C segment, that's like a Honda Civic, RAV4, CRV, Nissan Rogue. Then you have D sedan, which is a slightly bigger sedans, like a Nissan Maxima. I'm still very familiar with my ex-Nissan cars, Alexander. DSUVs, which are like the Chevy Traverse, you know, the Toyota 4Runner, not so much the 4Runner, but like the Highlander, that's a Honda Pilot, that size vehicles, and then full-size pickup trucks. The bad news is I don't have a full-size Peugeot pickup truck. I could probably get one in the future, but as of right now, I don't have one.
Not sure the brand is very well positioned for compared to how the full-size pickups are positioned in North America, but that's also interesting.
Although we've just launched the Peugeot pickup truck is about to launch in Europe, so it's a co-branded with Mitsubishi, so it's not a pure PSA vehicle. So those 5 segments are really, really important. So the C segment's easy for me to compete in. So the 3008, the 5008, the 308 hatchback. There are some what I'll call nuevo sedans. The next version of what sedan will evolve to is an opportunity for us as well. So those are part of the global Peugeot portfolio. And what I'm not interested in right away are the B segment vehicles, the 208, the 2008, although the new ones are outstanding. Just in the US, as Alexander said, I joke sometimes with my French associates, just like I did with the Japanese, that we Americans are big. We're big people, we have big garages, we have big streets, We need big vehicles. I shouldn't say we desire big vehicles. So the bigger vehicles, we are having discussions with the brand, and Jean-Philippe Imperardo is the CEO of Peugeot on a global basis. We still are trying to develop China, and China's tastes relative to vehicle size is very aligned with North America. They like D segment vehicles, they like E segment vehicles. So we're looking at additional products that could expand the portfolio aligned with the segments that are really important in North America. So I'm very confident about where we are. The other key aspect of it is the electrification, or the CO2, very onerous CO2 regulations in Europe that kicked off in 2020 are driving high electrification of our portfolio. So by 2025, everything in the Peugeot portfolio will be either plug-in, mild, or fully electric. So I have the flexibility to bring over either ICE version, internal combustion engine versions of that, or electrified versions of those, which is a nice
Yeah.
portfolio.
I was going to say, I mean, for North America, you are seeing a lot of push towards electrification, and the Peugeot lineup is well positioned when it comes to hybridation. A lot of products are going to be hybrid, whether it's plug-in or mild hybrid, and so there is an advantage there, and there is a customer push. Less Europeans are doing this through regulations, whereas Americans are more doing it through customer incentives as well. There's a little bit of incentive, but it's mostly being driven by the customer, I would say, and that need.
Absolutely. Just one additional comment on electrification, just for everyone's understanding. The market share in 2019 for EVs, pure EVs in the United States, was 1.6% of sales last year. This year is 1.5%. It's actually gone down. And Tesla makes up 62% of all EV sales. So over the next few years, we're being told there's going to be 40 to 50 new dedicated EV models coming in the United States to compete for probably 3% market share. So the dedicated EV market is going to be extremely challenging. But it's going to be very interesting to see. And it could depend, whatever comes out of the Supreme Court in a week or so, on who might actually be administratively in charge of the EPA. So I think you're either going to see a push for more regulations to push EV or not. We won't know for a little while.
Yeah, no, that's right. And yeah, we found that actually it's more than over the next 3 years, it's more than 100 vehicles that are supposedly being launched. And when you compare that to the volume, even with the most optimistic forecast, it's going to be very difficult for those electric vehicles to be successful. That doesn't mean that some of them will not be successful. There will be some winners, but a lot of those vehicles will not meet the volume required for the upfront investment. And being able to bring products like yours with no necessity of having the volume backing that up, because you're able to bring that from Europe, is actually going to be a good way to enter the market and benefit from that consumer adoption of the EV electrification.
Absolutely. I just noticed my good friend Mr. Peter Payne is on the call as well.
Just one last question before we leave it to the floor and have the other people ask questions is, actually, what I know is the PSA group is already there operating as a free-to-move brand, and your car sharing operations are up and running, I think, in Washington, D.C. How would you just, because we need to also address how does the pandemic affected the operations, and how do you see this free-to-move evolving over the introduction of the Peugeot brand as well in the future?
Yeah, it's a good question, a good corollary, Alexander. So ironically, the COVID pandemic actually accelerated our Washington, D.C. car sharing business. And when we talked to consumers, a lot of them said they quickly moved away from mass transit. So they wanted to have a more private experience. And even things like Ubers and Lyfts, people were more hesitant. So you can control yourself, you can drive your own vehicle. We enhanced our cleaning protocols. But we still reminded people, you're still responsible to wash your hands, keep yourself safe. But we launched in October of 2018, the car sharing in Washington, D.C. And for about the first 12 months, it was clearly a money-losing operation. We were just getting customer acquisition up and running. We were trying to manage our costs. We learned very quickly that Washington, D.C. is an extremely expensive city to do business in, which doesn't surprise me given it's the seat of the federal government. I guess that makes perfect sense. But in 2020, a couple of things, fortuitous things happen, if you want to think of it in business terminology. Number one, our key competitor, ShareNow, which was the joint venture between BMW and Daimler, left. They actually exited the United States completely after losing about $60 million per year in car sharing. My boss doesn't like to lose any money. So, the thought of losing a lot of money for him, we were not going to move to the second city or the third city until we proved the concept was viable in city number one. So when they left, we very rapidly accelerated in February customers. So people would move from their platform to our platform. COVID struck, and in March, we did dip about 40%. But from March until now, it's been a steady incline. It's slowed, but it's a steady incline. At the same time, we really learned how to manage the cost. We worked with the city of Washington, D.C. We took away about $50,000 a month of parking costs. They were willing to rethink working with car sharing to give the citizens mobility access. So we were able to reduce our parking costs. We reduced our fleet maintenance costs by insourcing some items. So we brought the bottom line cost down at the same time the revenue was increasing. And we've now reached a point where we're a positive cash flow business. We believe with Stellantis, we're going to have access to better cost of vehicles going forward. Right now, we're running Chevy Equinoxes and Chevy Cruzes on a lease agreement with a lease plan, which is pretty expensive and hard to get out of. Peter could tell you stories. But now what we're looking at, we've identified potentials for second city. We're looking at Portland, we're looking at Denver, we're looking at Austin. So we are identifying the second city now that we have a workable model. So we're hoping to launch the second city sometime in Q2 of 2021. So I'm very happy to see. And the great news, how that ties back into Peugeot, Alexander, is if you own a Peugeot in the future, we're going to help you get access to mobility through Free2Move as well. If you need short-term rental, we can help get you access to that. If you own a 308 and you need access to a 5008, we want to help you get access to that vehicle. If you're traveling globally and you need car sharing in Paris, you're part of the Free2Move family as part of Peugeot. So it's a global network, a family network of mobility services to complement your vehicle ownership.
Yeah, that's very interesting as a business model. It's really the next step when you think about ownership and being able to provide both long-term services beyond just the car that you own in your home. So with that, I would propose that we open the floor to questions. So two options for those of you who would have questions. The first one is feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand and ask questions. The other one is also feel free to write your questions on the chat box and we can field them to Larry as we move forward. So, okay, Jason, I see you raised your hand and I'm gonna try and change in all view mode so that I can see people raising their head as well. So Jason, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, fascinating discussion. Larry, thanks so much for doing this, and Alexander for helping to sort of set the table here. I'm Jason Elkubi. I help lead economic development for the state of Virginia. This is a self-serving question, but I think it'll be interesting to the whole group. I'm interested, Larry, if you could talk about how you've approached the decision of where to manufacture the cars that you want to sell in the North American market. I understand that you're planning to basically import them, but can you talk a little bit about how you approach that decision on where to, manufacture the cars, where to assemble the cars, and also what does the longer term outlook look like in that respect? I've got a related question, which is, as you think about re-entering North America, what are the implications for sort of the rest of America? We've seen some brands establish a foothold in North America and use that, to get into, other parts of the Americas.
Yeah, great question. So answering the first one, Jason, on the manufacturing side, I can tell you now I've had outreach from probably 38 states who are all willing to help me build a plant.
I bet.
In the United States. Incentive levels are pretty impressive. What I've made it very clear to them is we know globally there's excess automotive capacity. If you look at the US, plants are running historically about 80% capacity. Italy, about 50 to 60%. Mid and Northern Europe, maybe 70 to 90%, depending. PSA is higher than that. We're quite high in the PSA group. So our point of view is until you have enough volume to justify even a CKD kind of operation or a partial assembly operation, it doesn't make sense to do that. I mean, Forex is probably the biggest influencer of my day-to-day business case analysis. And I liked it 6 months ago better than I like it now because the Forex has moved a little bit more in the Euro direction. But our goal is to get to probably between 30 and 70,000 sales in North America before we start building here. Now, that said, Stellantis opens up new opportunities we could consider. There's excess capacity in Mexico. There's excess capacity in North America, in US, and Canada. There is, through the synergies, there's a very high likelihood we're going to be looking for convergence in certain platforms or top hats or powertrains. So that might accelerate the logic to build something locally, because I don't have to build a plant. I just have to put my product in an existing plant. That would be TBD, but that's an opportunity, for us. So we're going to look carefully at that. And we built our business case around the Forex assumptions and the 2.5% tariff as a starting point. And right now it's good for me because I'm just a incremental variable cost on top of Sochaux or Rennes or other plants that we have in France or in Europe. So we're not putting don't have to put a tremendous amount of investment in those plants to support me. I just got to get the vehicles over here. So that kind of answers the first question. The second question, remind me of the second question.
It's about essentially using your North American base to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So our initial plan actually encompasses US and Canada. Now, the reason it was US and Canada and not Mexico at the time was Mexico in PSA parlance is part of Latin America. Now, it's very likely under Stellantis, it'll be part of NAFTA because it's part of NAFTA. So our plan from day one was to launch in 15 states and 4 provinces. Those 15 states make up 63% of US sales. Those 4 provinces make up 84% of Canadian sales in the first 4 years, 3 to 4 years. So in Canada, it's clearly BC, it's Quebec, it's Ontario, and I think it was Alberta. Yeah. I think were the 4. And then the states, you can imagine where they are. It's California, it's Texas, it's Florida, it's Georgia. I don't think Virginia was in that. I'm not sure if I want to have a conversation with Don Hall yet, the head of the dealer association in Virginia. Yeah. About as militant as a dealer association lead is in the United States. We'll get there.
Yeah. That's great. Thanks, Larry.
Thanks, Jason and Larry. Any other questions? I think Eric's question has been answered just now related to USMCA or American presence. So that's a great question from Elizabeth. From what you've learned so far, what advice would you give to a French brand from cars to fashion to food who wishes to enter the American market and reach the American consumer?
It's a great question. So there's a lot of people that believe a lot of verticals in commerce today are becoming commoditized. I've met with even companies like Carvana who are selling used cars digitally, and they've been very clear to say car brands are just commodities. There's Nissan, there's Toyota, there's Honda. The emotional appeal that used to attract us to cars has waned over time. And we've seen that through research. Used to be, especially for young males, the most important thing was what brand car they had. Now it's like number 6 or 7 on their list. Number 1 is like their gaming system or something like that and things like that. So when I think about the different products that can be brought over, to me, there's 2 axes. One is the getting access to consumers in a highly efficient way, which today is e-commerce. It's digital. It makes sure distribution costs more efficient. It makes sure marketing dollars spend more efficient. But the other part is how to differentiate your brand from the remaining pack that you're competing with. And I think, and I would say through our research, I was surprised. I mean, I'm part French. I love France, but I never realized until we did our research that there's a general, very positive impression or image of France. And it's not just wine. It's not just fashion, although those two definitely were top of mind of people, but it was technology. It was innovation. And I guess I naively didn't understand the American perception of that aspect of the French culture, but it's definitely there. And I was trying to get in my mind, what do I see in the US market today that would make me think that? And honestly, nothing just came to mind right away. But when you drove that topic home with consumers, they felt very strongly, very positively. So I think bringing out the Frenchness of it, and I think that does pop in cosmetics, it does pop in some areas of fashion. But if we were to bring technology over, if we were to bring appliances over, I'm just throwing different things out there. I think those elements need to be, clearly visible, in the way that the brand is expressed. I'd say a fail of that, honestly, in the automotive market is Fiat. So when Fiat launched about 8-9 years ago, the initial first year or two of ads were amazingly great. They were the sexiness of an Italian culture, and the car is a sexy, extension of you. It's a culture. It's fun. But the problem is the products never delivered on that. So the brand had a promise, but the products didn't deliver to that. And now we're at a point where Fiat's selling 3,000 cars a month. And they're trying to figure out how to resurrect that brand in North America. So I think, I joke all the time, but I'm very serious when I say this, you have one chance to launch a brand successfully. If you don't plan and execute that well, you will fail. And this is a key thing about the starting point. The reason we don't lock down our first date is on the calendar here is Carlos has been very clear. Larry, I don't care if the cars are ready. If you're not ready, if you're not 100% sure we're ready to launch, we're not going to launch. So making sure all those elements are bound together and you're ready and you understand what your brand's going to be, I think that's key to launching.
Thanks, Larry. Arlette has a question.
Sure.
Oh, you need to unmute yourself, Arlette. Oh, okay. I don't know. I don't know if Arlette. Okay. We may take it after. Let's see. So one question from Cathy. Have you encountered any anti-French sentiment among potential US consumer? If so, how do you, I would say, manage or mitigate that challenge?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wouldn't say through our research we've seen anti-French. We've seen more pro-American. In other words, like anything not American, forget it, right? So, but at the end of the day, those people will never consider us. If anybody with any brand or any car comes to the US and believes that the US marketplace as a pie is completely accessible to you, is being naive. There are people that will never buy Japanese. There are people that will never buy American. There are people that will always buy German. So in our research, I'd say the only negativity is there are some people, I have a feeling they tend to drive large SUVs and trucks, that will say, oh, that's going to be crap quality, And it's more about unknown, because those are the same people that say Korean cars are still crappy quality or Japanese are crappy quality, and they're the best quality. So I think what we have to do is we believe, and we've learned through some of the research we've done, there's a fundamental building block that's critical to get consumers to consider you regardless of your country destination or where you come from. You have to prove safety, security, and reliability. Those three things are paramount. And what we did hear from a lot of people is, I don't know if French brands are safe. I don't know if French brands are reliable. And some of them were going off their history of the French brands, which were not reliable. And this is a good example that's happened today with Alfa Romeo. Alfa Romeo has one of the most emotional purchase reasons. And the number one rejection reason is the poor quality. So if you don't have the quality, no matter how emotional you are, people aren't going to buy you. So we just have to convince consumers that we meet those core criteria, and we can start to break down those barriers to, I won't buy something other than what I'm comfortable with.
Great. Thanks, Larry.
Man.
Romain, I think you have a question. Go ahead, unmute yourself.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Larry, for this presentation. It was very interesting. I have a question for you. Do you think French brands need to like be expensive to be considered French and fancy? What's your strategy on pricing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we compared the brands, so at the time we chose Peugeot, we studied Citroën, we studied Peugeot, and we studied DS. I rejected DS because the most powerful engine we had in the DS lineup was 225 horsepower, 1.6 liter. It's really hard to compete against AMGs and M-types with 600 horsepower V8s under the hood in North America. So the premium buyer or luxury buyer just had an expectation that we couldn't meet from a hardware point of view. On the Citroën side, so if you look at Europe, Peugeot targets VW, Citroën targets Ford in Europe from a pricing position. And if you look at the positioning of Citroën, it's a little bit more mainstream. Peugeot's a little bit higher end positioning of those two brands. When we looked at the marketplace, we first looked at the market opportunity before we looked at the brands. So we looked at the entire milieu segmentation. If you look at affluency and postmodern attitudes, we did segmentation of the North American consumers, and we plotted every brand in the United States on top of that. And what we saw was this kind of unique opportunity space, which is kind of at the high end of mainstream, at the low end of premium, kind of a high-end generalist brand. And these people were buying like a loaded Camry or a loaded Civic. They were buying Volvos. They were buying some Subaru products as well. So people that were aspiring to have a little bit more luxury, a little bit more uniqueness, but they really couldn't afford or weren't willing to step up to a true premium marquee. And ironically, that's really Peugeot's global positioning. High-end generalist brand. They want to be at the high end of the mainstream portfolios. And it aligned well with a white space in North America. So if you think about how we want to position our pricing, it's TBD, but we'll be above the core of mainstream, where the largest volume is, and we'll be a little bit higher than that. But we believe that allows us to differentiate our product and offer a fairly narrow range. The other thing that's really important to me, I spent years running product planning for Nissan, is to have low diversity. If you look at what customers buy, the reason why there's such high diversity in our industry today is not because that's what people want. It's because customers have so much choice, they can never find what they want in inventory. If you went on today and configured a Nissan Altima on the Nissan website, you would have less than a 5% chance of finding that in a dealer inventory near you. So what do customers do? They buy the closest thing that the dealer just happens to have in inventory that the dealer discounted by $2,000. I want to have vehicles that are lower diversity. If you configure it, we have it. And that you're willing to pay, but not a premium, but not a discounted price for that vehicle. Because if I'm importing from Europe initially, and I'm incremental volume on an existing fixed cost base, I don't have to turn over a certain number of vehicles to be profitable. I need to be profitable, with a much lower turnover. So we believe that's the kind of philosophy you have to have. And you're seeing that play out in COVID in North America right now. The average dealer profitability is up $1,000 per unit right now. Why is that? It's because days supply is at record low levels. Dealers don't have inventory. Customers still want cars. So they're settling. Not only today are they settling on what the dealer happens to have, they're willing to pay top dollars for that. That just goes to show you how artificial our supply and demand relationship is in North America. And the OEMs are capitalizing on it. The OEMs are being very profitable right now, actually, at least especially in North America.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point as well, and that's also due to the fact that the production has stopped or has been drastically reduced. So demand and supply have both been impacted, and that actually went in favor of the prices. So that's a great point.
And interesting to that, Alexander, the OEMs have learned they can be profitable not running 3 shifts, 24/7, 6 days a week.
Exactly. It does have an effect, and we'll see how the volumes recovery will happen over the next few years, but it's unlikely that we will see the volumes that we had in 2018, 2019 back in very shortly. One other question from Clément is, what elements of Peugeot's Frenchness would you market in the US, and how would you do that?
So a core part of the brand pyramid that makes up Peugeot on a global basis is the 210-year history of the brand. We are an industrial company with a long history, a long experience, and we can bring all of that industrial know-how to the forefront in our communications. This is not a new brand. This is a brand that's been around for 2 centuries and has thrived over 2 centuries. On the product standpoint itself, there are some things that really pop with our Peugeot products. It is the high design. People consider them to be highly designed vehicles. What we refer to as high perceived quality, both inside and outside. Peugeot is very distinctive, even amongst the PSA brands. We have what's referred to as the iCockpit design. So it's a very small steering wheel. It actually will be the smallest steering wheel on any car for sale in the United States. We put the meter above the steering wheel. So when you're looking out in front of you on the road, to look at the meter, the speed, the RPMs, the gauges, you only have to glance down a little bit because it's above the steering wheel. You don't have to look down through the steering wheel. And we put all of the controls with an easy touch of the driver. So it feels driver-centric, but it delivers this kind of sporty, athletic feel to the vehicle that's also highly designed with high perceived quality. We use really great materials. It's not a bunch of hard plastics. The team does a really good job of making sure things are soft touch, tactile feel. So those elements are very Peugeot globally, and it starts in France, of course. And we're going to really focus on those elements because it really brings home this unique driving experience also that's hard to explain until people do it, but we're trying to find the right words. The platforms that PSA have are great at delivering both comfort and dynamic performance. And that's not necessarily mutually, real in most brands. If you want high performance, you tend to be very stiff and very uncomfortable drive, or vice versa. The PSA platforms, especially the EMP platform, is extremely good at delivering that kind of balance. So we want to deliver that from a Peugeot brand point of view, and then bring in those elements of the other things that we do, from the pepper grinders to the bicycles to other things we're looking at too.
Great. I think we're almost at the top of the hour. So one last question. I see Pierre has a question.
Thank you, Alexandre, and thank you, Larry, for this presentation. You've presented us your strategy towards your consumer market so far. How do you plan to tackle the business and professional markets?
It's a great question. So are you referring specifically to B2B type activities?
Yep.
Yeah. So we're launching B2B activities through Free2Move initially. So we have in the Free2Move portfolio in Europe, we have connected fleet management, we have fleet sharing that's used by companies and universities. So we've already got a team on the ground in North America that has started to develop those relationships with potential B2B partners. And that'll be the first rollout of any kind of B2B. We're also looking at B2B, obviously, with the Peugeot brand. And ironically, we're also exploring, this is just an exploration, no decisions. We recently, through the Citroën brand, launched a vehicle called Ami in France or in Europe. It's basically I call it a mono vehicle. If you look at it from the front of the back, it almost looks the same. It's a low-speed vehicle that's it's sold for about 7,000 euros, I think, in Europe, or you can lease it for like 70 euros a month or something like that, some very low number. It's a little electric vehicle, it's low speed. We're now looking at that for both car sharing opportunities as maybe even retail or for potential B2B with universities or company campuses, assuming people actually go back to company campuses. At least we're hoping for that. So, and then what I want to avoid on the B2B side is fleet dependency, meaning rental dependency. One of the drugs that our industry tends to put in its arm and never take out is selling rental cars. Hundreds of thousands of rental cars. And I think that whole rental business is shifting with COVID and post-COVID, but those tend to be loss leader vehicles, and that's not my objective. My objective is to sell retail as much as I can to consumers.
And I think, as you were mentioning, OEMs have learned to part through the rental car business as well through this pandemic, which also helped their profitability.
Yep, absolutely.
Any parting words, Larry, before we close?
I think Arlette is still trying to ask that question.
Oh, Arlette, if you wanna unmute yourself, is there a way that we could unmute her? I don't think we can, actually. There is, Arlette, there is a button on the bottom left of your screen with a microphone if you want to unmute yourself.
There you go.
Oh, thank you. My question is, the electric cars you will be exporting to the United States, will they be usable in France, let's say?
So
I'm talking about, let's say.
Yeah, so the unique regulations in North America, the lighting regulations, the safety and crash regulations, allow the vehicle, they're not interchangeable vehicles. So the vehicle homologation we're doing for North America has unique elements in the body and white structure, the platform structure, the powertrain structure that makes it unique for North America. And that's one of the reasons why, outside of developing our customer journey, that it's taking us so long is what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to band-aid an existing 3008 and bring it over to the United States with a bunch of add-ons. I wanted a vehicle that American consumers and Canadian consumers would see as an American vehicle. And the classic example of that is the power lock switch. On almost all PSA vehicles is in the middle of the center stack, right above the audio system. Americans don't like that. Americans like their power lock switch in the door. So just something as simple as making sure by waiting for the next generation of vehicles, I can optimize the cost to homologate for North America, and I can make those specification changes that makes the vehicle more accommodating for American tastes.
That's a very interesting example, Larry. I know of a German brand that struggled very much in the early launches of their vehicle because they didn't have a placeholder for the coffee pot that Americans always have, and Europeans really don't. It doesn't matter that much. And so that's been a massive shift that it took them probably a couple of years to really integrate that into the vehicle, and it did make a difference as well. So that's an important part too.
What's funny about that example, Alexander, is the Europeans do door cup holders amazingly well. I mean, hold 1 liter bottles. Americans do cup holders well, you know, but I haven't seen anybody that does both well yet. So we're working on that. We're working on it. I'm still fighting my French colleagues on the size of the center cup holder. You know, the only parting words I have is, you know, I thank the entire team for inviting me to speak and sharing a little bit of our PSA vision for North America. It's going to be dynamic for the next year or so with the changes with Stellantis. So definitely we'll keep in touch.
Thank you very much, Larry, and thank you very much, all.
Well done, Larry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to
Thank
see you,
you,
Mr.
Larry.
Payne.
Thank you, Alexandre. Thank you all.
Take care.